Welcome to the Thinky Doers podcast. Thinky Doers are those of us drawn to deep work, where thinking is working. But we don't stop there. We're compelled to move the work from insight to idea, through the messy middle, to find the courage and confidence to put our thoughts into action. I'm Sarah Lobkovich, and I'm a Thinky Doer. I'm here to help others find more satisfaction, less frustration, less friction, and more flow in your work. My mission is to help change makers like you transform our workplaces and world. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Thinky Doers podcast. I am super excited to welcome my friend and industry colleague, Jason Johnston, to the podcast. JJ is the OKR and Outcomes Practice Lead for a technology organization called Genetec. Just two quick things I want to share with you before we dive into this first part of my conversation with JJ, since there might be more folks listening today who are already working with objectives and key results or have more familiarity about the practice of OKRs, the collaborative goal setting method that I work really closely with. I do have a new tool that's available, and I am super curious to hear what you think of it. I've been kind of mini obsessed with the idea of creating a tool that can help assess objectives and key results. Now, the one I built is specific to No-BS OKRs, the form of OKRs that I personally work with. So this isn't a generic OKR assessment. It's an assessment that will help tell you how well your OKRs are set up to help make systemic change, transformation, and more than incremental growth in your organization. So grab your most recent set of OKRs and sit down and take a minute and take the assessment. You'll receive an instant answer about what's working in your OKRs. And then over the course of the next couple days, I'll send you a couple of follow-up emails sharing some of the places where you might have room for improvement, along with some resources that might help. And those are really tailored to your specific answers on the assessment. So you can find that assessment at findrc.co/OKR_assessment. I'll also link to it from the show notes since that URL is pretty long. Also, if you're a person who operates OKRs in an organization and would like to outsource a little bit of the cognitive overhead of keeping yourself on an OKR schedule, if you'd like to connect with other folks who are focused on goal setting and achievement and the behavior change to actually attain change, if you'd like one-on-one feedback from me on the goals that you create, and ongoing live group sessions with me all year round, you're going to want to join the newsletter today if you haven't already. So you can find that at findrc.co/subscribe. I've got an announcement coming out really soon that might not even be shared with the public. The only way you're going to hear about it is newsletter only. So if any of that sparks your ears, then join the newsletter today at findrc.co/subscribe. Now, JJ and I were scheduled for an hour to yield about 20 or 30 minutes of an episode after editing, but this one, I'm sorry guys, I just didn't have the heart to make big cuts to. So I'm going to release this episode in two parts. First, my conversation with JJ about his work as an OKR and Outcome Practice Lead with Genetec, a technology organization in the security products and solutions space. Then I'm going to release a bonus episode where JJ and I continue our conversation about life as Thinky Doers, how he keeps his brain busy and healthy doing the work he does, our mutual love of Legos, and the role that being 4 plays in his well-being. All right, so now I'm going to get into the first episode. JJ and I, when we start talking, we just dive right in. So his introduction comes a little bit late. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I'll put JJ's info in the show notes in case you have any questions and want to get in touch with him. And then don't forget to tune in for part 2 of our conversation. Jason, I'm really excited to have you on. I don't remember how we met. Do you remember how we met?
I had signed up for one of your No-BS OKR courses, and I was in one of the cohorts. As I recall, I had just dropped some nuggets in there, like the birthday cake one and some of that stuff. And,
Oh,
like I just kept dropping them. Like, I'm an extrovert by nature. I love to participate. So we just started there. I'm of the opinion that if we want to really be good at something, we can't just take one perspective of something, right? You got to keep learning. You got to look at it from different ways. You got to take other people's perspectives. I say that about everything, but especially in OKRs, right? It's a maturing methodology. And if you just stick with one way, you're going to get behind and you're not taking the best of breed at that point. So you got to learn. If we talk about OKRs alone, we're not necessarily hitting everything we need to. OKRs are related to leadership, outcomes, especially, right? And outcomes, we say that word lightly, but it's a muscle and it's not the way that humans think normally. So, outcomes are a requirement and a tie to strategy. Those are the things, like, we're starting to see the foundations of it. It's never just OKRs. You have to understand how all these other things go along with it. And you have to make that part of everything that it is. Your program, if you're coaching, you have to make it a part of everything.
yeah, yeah, part of the whole working system. And Jason, this is why I hit record because I knew we'd just start. So let's back
Yeah,
up a step, and I'd love to have
sure.
you just introduce yourself, tell us what you do and where you do it.
Yeah, no. So, Sarah, I go by JJ, but I'm Jason Johnston. I'm just outside Chicago in the northwest suburbs. I work for a company called Genetec. We're a software company. We're based in Montreal. I've been with the company for almost 13 years now. I've held multiple roles. I've been customer facing for most of my career, technical. I've been a field technician for companies. Like I said, I've always been customer facing. And this is probably one of the very first jobs that I have that is not external customer facing, but I consider everybody internally my customer. Like I said, that's what I do. I love it. The companies that I've worked for, I've done for a long time. I learned very young not to hate your job. I am also a retired Army. I joined the Army at the age of 17. And I retired out of the National Guard, but I was in for 21 years. I did my tours overseas. And it was really where I built my leadership style. I consider myself a servant leader. That's how I function and how I act. I get my success from others succeeding. I don't get my success from me succeeding. So I typically say, if you want to judge me, judge those I help. Let's see how they're doing. And if you do that as well, then great. Then I'm doing a good job. So,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I operate.
I mean, it comes through just in our interactions, even in the workshop that I teach. When you join, it's almost like I have a co-instructor. You're there to help. You just show up to help. And I do think, though, that's not rare for folks who work with OKRs. There is kind of a type that's drawn to this practice. You're different than the type because you're an extrovert. So that's awesome. We get some diversity. All my guests are introverts. So this will be fun. But tell me a little bit, how did you start working with, actually, we're going to come back to your career after the halfway
Sure.
point because it is a really fascinating kind of trajectory that you've had. But tell me how you started working with OKRs.
I have degrees in network management and electronics. I'm a technical person, right? I'm a problem solver, is what I am. And I didn't actually know about the OKR process until I had a boss who
Mhm.
said, "Hey, I want to give this a try." And I said, "Okay." So I kind of started learning about it. And the group was in a lot of influx at the time. So I kind of dug into it, but it didn't really take. It was in one group. Not to say OKRs doesn't work for one group, but there wasn't really a driving force behind it. And then about 2 years later, I had another boss who said, "Hey, I want to do this in the group." And at that point, I just stood up and said, "I'll champion this." So I had had some delving into it, but I saw it as a way to organize work. We were a group that just had a lot to do, right? We were, and I don't want to say messy, but we were accomplishing a lot of things. We had a specific number of resources, a certain amount of time. And anybody who delves into OKRs can see, hey, this is supposed to help you address these issues. So I started to champion it. And that was probably about 4 years ago now. I don't relate to time, like, so I don't keep track of time, I don't keep
Yeah.
dates of when I started doing something, but that was when I really started to dig in.
Mhm.
And when I say that I read every day, every break that I'm not actively engaged, I'm reading something about OKRs, about strategies, about leadership. That's when I started it. And I've attended probably, Sarah, your No-BS OKRs class is probably my fifth kind of OKR instruction, right? I've learned from Microsoft. I've learned from this company, that company. I dove into the networks, the Ben Lamorte and the others that,
Mhm.
we both know. I read books from, John Doerr's book and Christina Woodkey's book. I just read and read and read. And I still had to do that today. So I just really, at that point, took it on as a profession. And my next thing to do was, how do I get my company to create a position for me? And I didn't do that alone. I had buy-in from some political capital there.
Yeah.
It took about 3 years, and the company started a position for me. And I'm not called, I call myself the OKR Practice Lead, but my actual position is the Outcomes Practice Lead.
Oh, that's
So,
good.
yeah, I work with the development teams to basically, that's where we're starting. OKR is my job, and outcomes are my job, and
Right.
strategy is becoming my job. So,
I mean, that's exciting. Yeah, it's exciting when those things kind of weave together. I mean, I'm working on a book and it is about that intersection and the way that OKRs done well or done certain ways in certain environments can kind of tie together the gaps, fill the gaps in our strategies and in strategic implementation.
what's really funny about it is it's tied into various parts of my life, right? I've had to dig back in my life and see where the skill sets really applied, because the stories, how we inspire ourselves, why we get up in the morning, right? That comes from our own life. We get up and say, this happened. This is what drives me forward. This is where I do good. Or I'm not going to do that again because that didn't work out, right? So I've really had to do some self introspection. And what do I want to do? And what am I tying into? How am I leveraging my strengths? I've had to do that. It's been kind of a fun adventure.
It shows in your work, and there's so many like, we could spend the rest of the episode unpacking the
Yeah,
stories you've
for
already
sure.
told me, because the power of purpose and that you have that wiring to help other people, to lead through helping. Again, like, this is what I find when I get the privilege of speaking with other OKR nerds.
No,
Other
that's fine. I gravitate towards the word, right? All day long. All day long.
those of us who are down this particular rabbit hole. But the other thing I love that I want to call out, because some folks listening are familiar with OKRs, some are like us, they're in the trenches. Some people are barely aware or have never heard of OKRs. And it cracked me up to hear the story of the leader came in and said, "We're going to try this," because that's how it happens. Like, usually it's a leader coming in and handing someone a copy of Measure What Matters and saying,
Right.
"Let's do this." But in that story even, that you saw the potential, and then the second time around recognize this needs a champion. Like, this isn't going to happen without someone to lead into it.
We can say that about most things today, right? Not just OKRs. But if we want to create real change in anything we're doing, especially in the companies we're in, somebody has to drive it. We're in today's world, the companies run lean and mean, right? Everybody's got a job they do, they're busy. And if you want to affect change, we're all transforming, right?
Yeah, it's
Just
true.
look at the news. Every company's transforming, right?
Yeah.
So, are you going to task somebody who's got 5 other jobs to be in charge of your change? Or are you going to put somebody in charge of it and say, help us with this, right?
Right.
Help us figure this out, help us grow this. And then it comes to understanding how change happens. It comes to understanding people, because nothing happens overnight, right?
Mhm.
These things take time. Changing people is a hard job. And to put it simply, the carrot works better than the stick. Leading somebody down a path it's a better way to get them to change. I have this individual in a company, he's a project manager, and whenever I'm talking with other people about OKR specifically, he always says, Jason's not going to do the work for you. He'll tell you how to get there and he'll show you how to get there. But believe me, he's not going to do the work for you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, good, I'm doing it right. I'm leading them down the path rather than say, go down the path. And I think that's the way we do it.
I mean, that's how we do it. But that's also, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because for the OKR coaches who are listening, that's the hardest thing for some OKR coaches to learn and internalize, because we are the ones that raised our hands and said, I'm excited, I'm going to help champion this, help make it happen. Then we also do so much labor because we're so passionate and we want it to work out, And so it is fun to see OKR coaches embrace the role of being a professional expert in the field who's not going to do the work for you. So
Sure.
that's awesome that your colleagues you don't have to say that yourself. They'll do
for
it on
sure.
your behalf. Well, fantastic. So tell me a little bit about, what was it that made you raise your hand to champion the effort? What was it about the practice that really attracted you?
You had asked a question in your email that says, have you been in an environment where the best solution came forward? And it got me, the military, everything I ever accomplished, I didn't do myself, right? It was always a team. That was initially kind of what drew me to it, right? We have to break the hero complex, even though it's how some of us are built. A manager should not bear all the weight of something. I'm in the tech sector, right? The comment by Steve Jobs, the quote is something to the effect of, we hire smart people to tell us to do smart things. That goes so deep, right? It's never just one person. It's helping other people. It's getting their buy-in. It's taking other perspectives to come up with a solution. That's what I see in OKRs. I see it as enablement of a team. I see it as a manager who's part of a team to come up with whatever solution you need. I just view it as a powerful motivator of that. By whichever method you get it delivered, coming up with solutions from a room of smart people is difficult, but that solution will often be better if I get it from 8 people than just one person. So that really is kind of the hook for me and what drives it. And that's attached to a lot of intangible things, right? Things that we might not be able to measure or say, but there's so many good dynamics that come with that type of environment. And I just see OKRs have the ability to deliver that, right? And I think being aware of that's important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up heroism. That is one of the other things that I think is hard for organizations to wrap their head around, is what happens in a lot of cultures is that those acts of heroism are what get recognized and celebrated and rewarded. And then there are sometimes some of us in the background saying, well, yeah, but if we'd prepared, we wouldn't have had that crisis that required a hero. So much of the success of OKRs in organizations is invisible in that way. So I wonder, in you've done this, I didn't realize you'd only been at it 4 years. That's pretty impressive that you've gotten where you have in the practice so fast. That does, being a reader helps, being a constant learner helps. But is there anything that you can point to that you think helped your organization accelerate the implementation? How did you get so far so fast?
I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that believes in its people, right, to do things. Being part of an organization that lets smart people go to work and do what they need to do, some amount of autonomy, right? If you can work for an organization that you can move around in and your job title was never created before, and you like doing it and then lets you grow and encourages growth, that's the type of environment that is ripe for something like OKRs, right? If something's not already in place, that's the type of environment that's ripe for it, right? And I think in the tech sector, we can find that in multiple places. You have to be able to inspire yourself and other people. And when I say that is, no effort worth doing is going to be easy. it's going to be hard. You're going to have good and you're going to have bad days. If you're doing that alone, you're going to get worn down, right? You have to have people that support you. You have to have people that are willing to go on that boat ride with you. You have to have an environment where you can build a community. You got to have buy-in. Like, you have to have all these other things. Otherwise, it's not going to succeed in the long run. Mm-hmm. So in OKRs, I think like I said, you can read John Deere's book. You can read the book and talk about OKRs and how you write them. There's so much more that goes along with it. You have to jump in. You have to start building a community as fast as you can. You have to start getting buy-in from people and inspire people that this is the right way to do things. You have to help them see the value right away, but you have to have an environment where that's fertile field to grow. If you don't, it just won't succeed. And that's part of this too, right? You got to cut your losses when you got to cut your losses, but you got to stick it out and get through to the end when it's worth it. And that's up to each one of us to decide. That there's no book for that. There's no measurement of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of what goes along with, hey, I want to do OKRs. I'm going to read this book, or we're going to bring this coach in, or we're going to start this. You really need to decide how you're going to commit to this.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. On paper, I think OKRs look simple, especially with Measure What Matters. It's almost a pitch for OKRs. So,
right.
It does create a lot of excitement and a lot of interest among senior leaders. I think what's interesting, and important about the role that you got to play is knowing you. I think you're super intellectually humble. And so you're probably able to model that we're going to get it right, we're going to get it wrong, and we're going to learn. That's challenging for some leaders.
Sarah, I want to give you some props here real fast, in that the No-BS OKRs class really kind of changed the way I look at OKRs and making it more intuitive. A lot of times people get hung up on, well, this is how I'm supposed to write it. And I've had people that I help, right? And they're like, I can't figure out how to write this. And I say, let me help you out here. What do you need to accomplish? And they'll be like, oh, I need to do this. And I go, who's that important to? And they go, oh, this. I said, boom, there's your objective, right? That's all you need. You said it to me in 10 words. It doesn't need to be long.
Yeah.
That's what you got to do. And that's where you got to go. The next part, how you measure it, well, that's a little bit harder, but I can tell you where you're headed right now.
What we're talking about for folks who aren't familiar with the practice is I'm an advocate for writing objectives as quickly as possible. Answer the question, what's important? Why does it matter? And if you're stuck, then ask, who is it important to? And the faster you get to that what, why objective, the more time you have to create key results. And those are the hard part. So, well, awesome. Have there been any big challenges that you've seen implementing OKRs? What have you really struggled with?
Okay, let's talk about outcomes for a minute, right? As humans, we're not naturally wired for outcomes, even though if we think about our lives, a lot of us deal with outcomes in our daily lives, and it is how we think, right? The example I give about the birthday cake, is it the birthday cake, or do we just need to provide 50 guests with a sweet dessert, right? Mm-hmm. That's my agility right there. I don't necessarily need the birthday cake. But we're not naturally wired to think in outcomes. And we're smart. We do our tasks, right? So it's naturally easiest for just to go, oh, well, I need to do this and this and this, and have a list of 50 tasks to check off that I accomplished, because it gives us an immediate sense of accomplishment, organization. The problem is 30 of those tasks, well, they're not really what the company needs to do right now. So, and by the way, I've only got 6 people and I don't have time. How am I going to possibly get all this done? I'm too busy. I can't do more paperwork. Right. So moving to outcomes and what impact are you going to having helps us trim that down, focus our work, and it ties us to a higher purpose, right? That if we're building software, happier teams that are focused on their work, who love coming to work every day, are going to build better product faster just by the nature of the team. I didn't even have to bring anything else into that, right? I don't have to bring extra processes and stuff like that. But if they're happy doing it, happy fixing it, happy going along, accepting failure, driving on, and all that good stuff, we're going to get better product in the end anyway, faster and hit our goals. And understanding that relationship is a muscle that you have to build.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just say, flip a switch one day and, oh, this is how we're working. That's not how it works. And you can't tell people to do that. You have to, again, guide them down that path. You have to walk them down it. It's coaching, it's mentorship, it's education, it's demonstrating it in your own examples, always being outcome driven. That is one of the hardest things I think that I've seen, is just getting people to think like that naturally.
I mean, this is one of my topics of hyper focus because I'm fascinated by it. I think people begin their careers trying to understand what's expected of them. And that creates a habit of trying to understand what's expected of us. And then the more we get into our careers, the more we see what happens if you don't achieve a goal in most cultures. In most cultures, if a goal isn't achieved, there are consequences. It's not a curious learning opportunity. So the outcome thing, it's really funny I actually tried to write my book without talking about outcomes. And I just decided it's not possible, because people hear that word and then I have debates about what that word means and what is an outcome. And the bottom line is, it's not about arguing about the definition. It's about talking about, does something need to get done or does it need to yield a result, which is most important. But that mental shift is just so hard for people. And I think it's because, to a large degree, we feel some sense of control over what we're doing. And the idea of setting goals at work that we influence but don't control the outcome of is just really scary for folks. It takes a special setting for that to be safe.
Another important part of outcomes is understanding other people's perspective of outcomes, right? Like Toyota, if I go to the Toyota method of the 5 whys,
Mm-hmm.
right? I can take a task and push it to 5 whys and probably get to the CEO level, right? And the CEO level of an outcome is not the same as the team leader level of an outcome, right? If I say my team manages 5 products and I want to deprecate one product, at the CFO level, that's money and budget. But at the team leader level, my team is happier because they don't have to manage 5 products.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it's about perspective too. It's about being able to understand where they exist in the environment and help them reach the outcome that matters to them. Because again, if I'm trying to teach the team leader about budget and finance, it's not motivating to them. That they're like, I don't get this. But if I ask them, if you have one less product, what does that mean to you? And they're like, my people have more time, right?
Yeah.
There we are, right there. There's your outcome, And then what I can say is you've affected your team. You've changed your environment. And that is the most impactful OKR you can have. You've created a better working environment.
What you're talking about is one of the things I don't think gets enough attention is in OKRs, when we look at localization and how do OKRs move down through the organization, the focus is almost always on clarity and alignment. How do we align up to what's most important? But you just hit on maybe the more important part of localization is that it lets you contextualize the key results, the objectives and key results to what matters to the people you're working with. And then back to your point, happy software developers make better products.
Right. Happy employees do better all around, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's never going to stick the first lesson either, right? It's a way of thinking that they have to be guided and mentored to. They will get there, right? But you got to help them down that path. You have to support them. You have to be sure they're supported throughout, right? Which requires a lot of things to just make it work that way. One other thing that you do, I think that's real important is it's about metrics, right? And getting there. And a metric is not always just hard. Sometimes a metric is somebody said my class was awesome twice. right? That's a good metric. Somebody talking to you, something going on in your life, that is a metric as well, right? How
Yeah.
do you measure your success? I think that that's another key thing too. Not everything can be found in a business system. So again, we go back to we're changing our environment.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing we can do.
Yeah. It's all circular in my head because if we're relying on our business metrics, those are metrics we've already instrumented. That is the known. So much of our OKR creation is about the unknown. We're not always going to find the outcome measures or the leading indicators in our existing metrics because we're talking about making change that doesn't exist yet. So anything that can be counted can be a basis of a key result. And sometimes those are more impactful than whatever comes out of our business tools. Well, have you had any aha moments? And this is kind of where we'll talk a little bit more about OKRs, but we'll also talk a little bit about your career. What really struck you about OKRs that might have made a difference in your broader life or work?
I'm not going to pretend I've always been out. Everything I do is outcome based thinking, right? Right now, I live and breathe it, and
Yeah.
everything that I do throughout my life, right, is just making a part of who I am. I don't know when that switch really occurred, right? It was just something that I adopted. But like aha moments when I see what I teach get picked up by a team where I didn't necessarily see it or I didn't necessarily think it would happen. When you train a team and they pick it up and they make it a part of every process, you
Mhm.
sit in one of their staff meetings and you see the OKR software in their briefings. They talk about it, they talk to each other that way. And you didn't necessarily give them a whole lot of coaching, right? But they just picked it up and ran with it. You can't help but feel, okay, what I'm doing is
Mhm.
working, right? I think I have a lot of aha moments when I'm standing in front of a group or somebody and I'm talking to them and the message gets across the first time and they really embrace it. Or when you start talking to somebody and you see them have the aha moment, you see on their
Mhm.
face, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense,
Yeah.
right? Those are what I would take as my aha moments. That's very much how I'm built. When I see others get it, that is where I get my greatest pride.
Yeah.
And I also come from an environment where failure was very much just something that happened, right?
Mm.
You fail, you assess, you solve, you keep moving forward. And I think having that type of mentality too, it kind of, I don't want to say levels the playing field, but it keeps your road smoother so that you don't have these ups and downs. I can't really point to any one aha moment because I'm sure they're there, but I could talk all day about when I saw somebody's eyes light up
Yeah.
and then they put it in a practice themselves and they still practice it and they just get joy out of their day working that way. That's when I'm like, holy cow, I didn't think it would stick that fast. Or wow, they have really taken that to the nth degree. That's
Mhm.
awesome. Right.
It's so cool. It's, one of the notes I jotted to myself when you first started talking at the very top was, how do you stay so positive? It's one of the reasons I love what I do so much is that the people who are drawn to this style of this practice, the coaching model of OKRs and the service model of OKRs with that focus on learning, it is like this wonderful eddy of people who keep their positivity because we're always learning. So it's not toxic positivity, it's that learning wiring just keeps us, once we find the space where we can make change and expand and experiment, it just leads to, I don't know about you, I've had some really dark chapters in my career that were not like this.
Sure.
And so now to be in a place where I get to spend most of my time with other people who have found something similar about OKRs as I have and maintain that positivity. Have you always been this chronically positive?
I have a 20-year military career. I have some dark times, right? I was a suicide first responder. in the Army. I've had some very dark times, but we come out the other side. These are the things that define us. These are the things that help make us who we are. I'm a scout leader, and what I love to tell people is failure. Kids learning to cook will only burn butter once. And if they're on a 3-day camp out, they'll definitely only burn it once, right? Because they're not going to go hungry. Taking those failures and rolling it in and understanding that failure is only bad if you do it again and again and again and again, right? If we do it once, that's called a learning. That's not necessarily failing. And if we celebrate all of our wins, all of our accomplishments, then that time that we learn is not that big of a deal to us. It's part of the process. So we have to put as much emphasis on the things that we accomplish as well as the things we don't accomplish, right? And the process built around that is important.
All right, friends, that's where I'm going to wrap up this episode. But don't forget, there's a bonus episode with the second half of my conversation with JJ that I'm going to share as the Thinky Doer short. So don't go anywhere, stick around, and catch the second part. All right, friends, that's it for today. If anything from today's episode resonated or left you puzzled, I'm here to hear it. Stay in the loop with everything going on around here by visiting findrc.co/subscribe and joining my mailing list. Got questions? Reach out to me via email at sarah@sarahlobkovich.com. I'm going to spell that out once. It's SARALOBKOV as in Victor, ICH. So Sarah, no H, Lobkovich. It's a mouthful. Or you can find me as Sarah Lobkovich on your favorite social media platform, including Threads, and we're thinkydoers.social on Mastodon. For today's show notes, visit sarahlobkovich.com. If there's someone you'd like to hear featured on this podcast, drop me a note. And if you know other Thinky Doers who'd benefit from this episode, please share with them. Your referrals and reviews are much appreciated. I'm looking forward to the questions this episode sparks for you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.